You're listening to the podcast Back to the Real, and I'm your host, Marcus Taylor. Welcome to the podcast Back to the Real, the podcast about how movie influences you and how it impacts on you. Today's guest is my friend John Zeller. He's from the United States and he works as a media producer. And he's here today to talk about horror movies. Ready? Okay. John, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Marcus, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you here. Could you tell me a bit about yourself?
Yes. So I'm John Zeller. I'm if you couldn't tell, I'm not from Sweden. I'm from the United States.
Are you sure?
And so I spent the last 17 years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And prior to that, I'm from Ohio, which is not far from Pittsburgh, but a lot less interesting, more farmland and that kind of thing. But in Pittsburgh, I did many things, but I grew my love of filmmaking. I started out film school there, Pittsburgh filmmakers, and learned on 16 millimeter film. So I edited on a flatbed. I did it the old way and taped the film together and everything like that. And it was just 2005, 2006, just when people were starting to switch to mini DV and do more. It was more accessible then.
There was a big transition there going on as
yes.
well. Yeah.
And so I was interested in that as well, but my original plan was this was the last place that would let you shoot on film. I wanted to shoot on film.
Yeah.
So I started, doing my short films with my digital video camera and my film camera, my wind-up Bolex side by side, and I would do all the rehearsals on the digital camera.
Yeah.
And then I'd do one take on the film. Hopefully they had it all down because film was so expensive to shoot on,
imagine.
even 16 millimeter.
I was thinking that, and then you have to process the film. And
send it away to, we had Summit Film Labs, which I don't think they exist anymore. And they might have stopped existing while I was there. I at one point had to send film to New York City and have it come back. And but I got to learn a lot that way. And you are much more careful with your exposures, and you're much more careful with everything when it's that expensive. And so I learned a lot. I can't say that the work I produced was great, but I had learned a lot, and there was a lot of great teachers there. A lot of people that taught me used to work on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with
we haven't
Mr.
seen
Rogers.
it. We've just heard about it later on, but I know of Mr. Rogers.
Sure, yeah. So Fred Rogers, he's big in Pittsburgh, and it was children's programming and PBS and that kind of thing. But these people had all come through this like pipeline of working in the industry and really much more blue collar film work than like Hollywood film work, which I loved. And so they had great stories and great practical information. And I got hired right out of film school at a small studio called Black Box, and then we grew it and changed the name and got to a point where we had a big. At the time, the biggest film in Pittsburgh came through, Unstoppable with Denzel Washington, and I got to be a production assistant on that and help get the film there because we
Did you meet Denzel?
I did not meet Denzel Washington. His scenes on the actual train, I may have seen him from a very far distance. He was kind of doing his scenes and getting out of there. I had lunch with Rosario Dawson once, which was great.
Cool.
Not just me and Rosario.
Now you're disappointed.
A table full of people, but it was like being invited to the cool kids table at high school. It was like that kind of thing. Like everybody's just like,
they picked me.
Yes, but that was, and at that point, I'm in my 20s, and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, this is how it's always going to be. It's going to be me in the film world and stuff. And then the company went under and kind of hit during the housing crisis. Everything got hard, and so I needed another job and like something that was more stable than the film industry. So that's when I kind of started picking and choosing, still doing some commercial work, still doing some music videos, but being much more of a one-man band or somebody who could jump on other people's productions. And not worrying so much about, trying to start the biggest film studio or something like that. And so I worked at a law firm then for 12 years in a video capacity, doing documentary work about injured people and on big cases to try to help settle the cases and help educate the insurance company that they needed to pay up. And not many people do anything like that. So I got to put my talents to a situation where I could actually see it help somebody, which was nice. And now I'm ready to do something else again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So it seems you have lots of experience of very wide areas.
Different, yeah. Master of none, but what is it?
Master of none.
master of none, but I do have a lot of interests and a lot of experience in various capacities. I'm just not. There's not one thing where I'm like, oh, I'm the guy to call or something like that. There's always people better than you, but having that thirst of learning.
Yeah.
And if somebody needs me to try to run sound, I at least know the basics. Or if somebody needs me to do whatever, I can jump in and help.
And that makes you more attractive as well on paper. It's like, okay, this guy knows this and this and this, and that makes you more.
Yes.
Wanted. Because for productions, I think more as a collaborative efforts as well. That everybody has their expertise in ways, and that you have a very wide variety of stuff that you can use.
Exactly, yes. And in film sets, the best film sets or the best commercial sets kind of run where people aren't stepping on each other's toes, but you need people to be able to say, like, well, I can help here, or maybe we should do that. It has to be collaborative. It can't be somebody saying, well, that's not my department. I don't do that. No. Like if you see it like a sandbag that needs to be moved and you move it, it really makes things go much more smoothly. You become everybody's best friend, if you're willing to help out.
Yeah, right. Cool. Nice. So, as a guest on the podcast, the tradition is that the guest decides what they want to talk about. So, my question is to you, what would you like to talk about today?
Marcus, I would talk about horror all day long if I could, and I'm going to make you be part of that today.
Oh my God! I don't know if you maybe the listeners can't see it, but the T-shirt I'm wearing, if people recognize the reference, is from the Halloween movies, some personal favorites of mine. So
mine as well, and I love this shirt, and I love the Halloween series, even the bad ones. I love bad horror. I love good horror. I love all horror. And
there is no bad horror.
Well, that's
okay.
Okay,
some.
That's a good point. What makes good horror? What makes bad horror? Right?
Yeah.
And I got into horror very early. Probably too early.
And would you like to share?
Yes, I would, and I would like to hear your story about stories about horror as well. But in the U.S. and it's different everywhere you go and stuff like that. But at least where I was growing up, kids with older siblings or older family members, it was kind of a rite of passage to be like, have you heard about this? Have you seen this movie? They get to watch these movies. I don't get to watch. And so as a little kid, you're always begging to have somebody take them with you or show you the next scary thing and stuff like that. You're aware it exists, but it's just not accessible to you. So you're asking. So I had a cool aunt. My Aunt Deidre, who we called Aunt Dee Dee. She was the youngest in the family before my sister and I were born. So she was like maybe 14 when I was born, maybe 15. But we have a very similar birthday, and she was hoping that I would have the same birthday as her and stuff. So immediately I was kind of her favorite nephew, and she was my favorite aunt. And she was into horror movies, and so because she was into horror movies and was talking about these things, like I was into it, and she would babysit me and stuff. And so she took me to see Nightmare on Elm Street when it came out. I don't know if exactly when it came out. It came out in '84 in October, I believe. I may have seen it months later, but I saw it as a 3-year-old.
3-year-old?
3 years old, I saw Nightmare on Elm Street with my Aunt Deidre. And,
okay.
and I was terrified, but I loved it. I loved the feeling of being scared and accomplishing something. And so I must have been, I feel so sorry for anyone who was around me at that time, that like siblings or my parents, anybody. Like I talked about Freddy Krueger nonstop after that. And it was a big mistake. Everybody was like, now it's a problem. He just keeps talking about it, And so I didn't get to see part 2 or part 3. It was outlawed. No, you don't get to see those. But I knew that they were around. So
it made you more curious and like more eager to watch them.
And I'm and there was a TV show around that time and stuff like that. And I'm trying to tape it on VHS tapes when no one's paying attention and stuff. and I'm drawing with crayons Freddy Krueger and
What did the people in kindergarten say when you did
I mean,
this?
and I dress up. There's pictures of me dressed as him for Halloween, and with the glove, plastic glove, and stuff. And so, it wasn't going away. My love for this was not going away. And eventually, then, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 was coming out, directed by Rennie Harlin, who's a Scandinavian, I believe.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's Finnish.
Yeah. And so my grandfather actually agreed to take me to see Nightmare on Elm Street 4. He was like, he's not going to stop. Like, you just have to like give into it at some point. And so I got to see 4. I saw 2 and 3 later in my life. But moral of the story is how they kind of gave in to this thing that they created, my love of horror, was my mom found a making of behind the scenes video of Nightmare on Elm Street 4. And that's how she kind of felt okay with having such a young kid be into all this kind of gruesome violence and stuff like that. She was like, if you can see the way they make it and that it's make believe and you can verbalize that as opposed to like the killing that happens on screen, okay, then we were on the same page. And so I watched how they did the special effects and that whole kind of thing. And I had this VHS, and that making of tape then ended up being my favorite thing to watch more than the actual movie.
But that's so interesting. So seeing the stuff behind the scenes made you even more interested and more invested in it, on how it was made, how it was done.
Creating a scare, creating how many people are involved to get like a very short amount of time on film. There's a scene in there where a woman turns into a cockroach.
Yeah.
And, it's so disgusting and really creeps me out on film. And I'm not even like scared of bugs, but it really bothered me. And then seeing them make it, I was like, oh, that looks like so much fun. Like that looks like they're having such a great time. So I think that was kind of the early stages then of like, well, maybe this is something I want to do.
Yeah.
And I haven't ever worked on anything that cool, but I was always like, one day I'm going to come up with my own scare, and it's something that's too good not to film. And so that's how I got into it. But what about you? What was your first introduction into horror?
I think my first introduction was Jaws.
Yes.
It feels like that's the one that people usually mention, and I was absolutely too young to watch it. I remember we were at our old summer place, and we had a little television there, and it was going to be on television, and my older brother and my mother's aunt was supposed to watch it in the evening, and I as a kid was, I want to watch it too, but you're too little, but still I want to watch it. Okay, it's going to be on your own. Okay, so we won't take any any caution. We won't take any responsibility for this, basically. So, and I'm like, okay. So, like, first 2 minutes, like, the girl got eaten. Oh my God! So I remember, and then running down the stairs, Daddy, the girl got bitten or got eaten. And then it was like, yeah, okay. Then I ran up again, and then it was the next person that got eaten, and it was, Daddy, it was a boy that got eaten. And now they bit off the legs.
Yeah.
So I remember it was so. I can still remember. I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I might be it was very late 80s. I remember.
Yeah.
What I remember is that at that point when I was watching, it was horrifying, but at the same, it was so cool. Mm-hmm. But then I tried to get to sleep, and then you get the nightmares, and then you realize during summer when you're heading down to the ocean and going to the beach, and like, oh no, there's a shark coming after me. Everywhere I looked, there was a fin somewhere.
Yeah.
So I still had just a reflex sometimes when I swim out in the ocean. I saw fin. Knowing that it's completely impossible for having white sharks
sure.
like in Malmö at the Öresund here, but still, it's been traumatizing. But still today, it's one of my all-time favorite movies. And I now, being a bit older, I see more and more of the qualities, the themes going on in the movie as well. But I have a similar experience like you. we had a book, I remember when I was a child, so Ron and Valerie Taylor, who did lots of underwater photography.
Okay.
And they did photography for the Blue Lagoon, for example, and some horror movie, I can't remember the name, unfortunately, but they did the photography for Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a huge chapter on the making of Jaws, and they had photos of the Bruce, as they called the shark, and I was so fascinated by that and thinking, okay, so it wasn't a real shark. Yeah, well, it's being a child, and so you thought it was real, even though it looks fake. But at the time, it was, but which made me very much more interested. And then when DVDs came. And I remember Jaws was one of the first DVDs I bought in the late 90s. And they had an entire documentary about the production of the movie. Yeah. And especially the shark is not working experience. And I found it so interesting how this movie, both how it was made and how it was perceived. And then also that it was the most, I think it had the best revenue and budget. It wasn't a high budget, but it had enormous high amount of income that it got. I think it was the #1 movie of '75. Yeah. I might be wrong, but I think it was like a huge hit and was the first real blockbuster.
Yeah, I think when like Avatar and these movies keep breaking records, I think when they show the list, like I always remember seeing Jaws like is still like to this day, like
So so I think that's my experience, and also being too young to watch it. But I think it was this curious, about a shark that's terrorizing. So I was like, I like sharks.
I think that's interesting how you talk about like how you wanted to tell your father like what happened. Also, like there's something about like the horror films of being scared, like you want to immediately like share that.
Yeah.
Which really, I feel like as a genre, horror and comedy are kind of like the two that are almost like it's built into the genre that they're expected to do something.
Yeah.
Other genres, like, they can thrill you in different ways and stuff like that, but people go into them with more of an open mind. The success of like horror and comedy is whether or not they were successful in making you laugh or making you scared, right? And so like when they are successful, it's a big deal, and it's not something that you just experience by yourself. Those are like things that you want to meet other people and see how scared they are too, or see what like. Exactly. I think that's so cool that you wanted to tell them exactly what happened on the screen. And that was the same thing with us. Like, my aunt, like it was like her wanting to, even though it wasn't like I'm going to go scar this child. It was I like this, I want to share it with as many people as I can, and it's so funny because then when she had kids of her own, like her kids did not watch horror. She was like, maybe I overstepped when I maybe. But my older sister was born on Halloween. She has a Halloween birthday, 1978.
Oh, wow!
The night Michael Myers came home was the day she was born. So
has that always been tradition that you always reference that?
I refer to it now. But she was not. My older sister was not like me, but she was there for a lot of them and would watch a lot of horror and stuff like that. Did not really get nightmares. My older sister's a genius. She won't like me saying that, but she is a genius. Oh. And she would read. It was a little different than me. She would read the books, like all the Stephen Kings, before she was probably able to process everything that was going on and stuff. So all the horror books for her were more of a thing. But because her birthday fell on Halloween, like she was right there posing for pictures with me with like, knives and Freddy gloves and stuff like that, pretending to scream like as I chase her around.
Oh, that's so cute as well.
But yeah, it's so much fun for me. And I mentioned coming from Pittsburgh, or most recently from Pittsburgh. And when I moved to Pittsburgh, I did not realize that it was such a horror capital. But once I was there, I really, really enjoyed all of the lore and things like that. There's an archive of George Romero that exists now at the University of Pittsburgh. You can go in and see all the stuff that his estate like saved, like his scripts, his handwritten notes, all of his behind the scenes photos. And so my wife, one year for Christmas, that was my present, was to go in and just get to play with his archives for a day with the white gloves on and everything.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, it was just so cool. And that era of filmmaking, when he was doing it in the late 60s, early 70s, DIY, like, you know, very low budgets and stuff. I mean, that grew so many future filmmakers, Tom Savini and Greg Nicotero and Jason Baker. Like, I mean, there's so many people who came from that style of filmmaking, like just zombies in general, using the zombie as a way to tell other stories. Yeah. So a lot of his stuff is about capitalism and, you know, or about consumerism.
There were messages, and especially in the movies. And me personally, I think that's something that's not been that present for today's horror movies, and especially when you talk about the creativity behind the scenes as well. When you have like people doing stuff from scratch, like you said, do it yourself, and build stuff, and then I mean, the stuff we watched, for example, we've talked about Jaws, we talked about Nightmare on Elm Street. All this was before CGI.
Yes.
They were on set. These were live effects that they did. And,
yeah. Well, I mean, the glove itself, right? The Freddy glove itself. I mean, they had various versions of like how sharp it would be and stuff like that for different scenes. But like, you know, there's famous stories of people, you know, getting nicked and cut. and you know, there wasn't like a way to do like CG Wolverine claws back then, you know, so it made for a better performance. Yeah. You know, Robert Englund tells great stories, but Wes Craven was so intelligent and came from a university. He was a professor, and so when you have that kind of like intellect behind your filmmaking and reasons to do stuff, reasons to know what scares people, I think that makes for a much better product. And like you said, some of the films today don't really have that.
I mean, there's still good horror movies, but some of them may rely too much on CGI. I mean, it's a helpful tool. I understand that, but at the same time, there is something about how we perceive practical effects versus CGI. And my personal taste is the more practical, the more I like it and get into it more. Yeah. And I think it has more impact and more effect on me as well.
Yes, I agree. And the best CGI is the invisible CGI, stuff that you didn't know that they were doing all of that. And
absolutely.
Like Christopher Nolan or people that, you know, they do it to enhance things, like maybe expand areas that are a little more cramped or something like that. Yeah. But it's not in your face. So like, well, that was a completely fake explosion, you know? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or like, you know, Michael Bay reusing like footage from 3 different films, you know, something. But I mean, at the same time, it's a business, right? So a lot of things are done because they're saving money or they're on a time crunch. There's a million things that can go wrong in a film set. So.
Absolutely. I remember talking about practical effects. One movie that scared the shit out of me, if I can use that word, was The Thing, John Carpenter's.
Amazing.
I remember my father, actually, I was watching it, but he thought it was like a completely different movie. And during, the famous dog scene, so he was like, oh, no, we can't watch this. And he turned off the TV. And I was like, but come on, I want to watch this. So no, you're getting to bed now. But I remember that I was sad and going to bed. And then the day after, I found out that my father went back and watched the movie. So he watched it to the end. I was like, come on. But I don't think it was maybe a couple of months later, I found out that a friend of mine had it on VHS. Mm-hmm. So I snuck it in and watched it without them knowing. But yeah, that movie scared the shit out of me.
It was such an amazing film.
And still is in many ways. And that's why I'm talking about these practical effects, even though, of course, if you put on new glasses and you watch it with today's perspective, of course you can see that some things might be a bit dated, but still having those practical effects and the ingenuity and the creativity, how they pulled everything off. To me, that still it's a masterpiece in my opinion.
Absolutely, and John Carpenter deserves, so much credit. I saw somebody talking about, like, these Oscar-winning filmmakers, these auteurs and stuff like that, and they have like this kind of like Yorgos Lanthimos is one that just comes to mind, having like the past like 3 or 4 movies where they're all just very good, just like such a high level of filmmaking. He's at the top of his craft. And somebody said, like, has there ever been a filmmaker that just was like, one after another, just like hit after hit? And I was like, yeah, John Carpenter.
Yeah.
Like in the 80s especially, like he had a run of 8 or 9 films that maybe they weren't commercial successes, but we look back on them now and every single one was like, he was just leaving it all on the screen in terms of performance, in terms of, the effects. He was doing the scores, like, incredible for somebody to have that kind of like, I don't know, just complete mastery of the craft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree with you. So, but I think at the same time, it feels like I found that also so fascinating. And then being a bit older and having still the huge interest of movies that I still do, seeing how things were made, how all of this is more accessible now with DVDs and Blu-rays. You can watch behind the scenes. You can even have commentaries when the director talks about how they recorded it and how they did. And I just find it so interesting, the whole process.
Yes, and I've only worked on one feature-length film, The Clearing, which I don't know how available it is in Europe, but it is on Amazon Prime. I just don't know if it's available overseas here.
Okay.
So you may have to use a VPN if you're trying to. Not that we advertise using VPN.
Yeah, what's a VPN?
People find ways to watch what they need to see. But it was, kind of like a sci-fi / horror film about a woman who gets lost in the woods during a kind of strange natural phenomenon of like we bring up the Tunguska event. So there's something weird in the sky. There's a weird storm. There's a lot of electricity involved, and it kind of warps like space and time a little bit while she's doing something somewhat unrelated, and so she's lost in the woods. She can't get home, but at the same time, a lot of strange things are happening, and she's remembering different parts of her own childhood. It's a great film made by Cunning Folk Films, which is a production company I worked with a lot in Pittsburgh. Stephanie Traynor is the director. And I was director of photography on it. And like you were saying with the commentary and stuff like that, we didn't record a commentary track because it's direct to streaming. It didn't come out on DVD, but so many stories I could tell you about literally every shot. We put the camera in some strange places, and there's if anybody wants to look this film up, there's if you're squeamish at all about wounds on feet, there's one of like some excellent work with Harley Lutz, one of Tom Savini's students. She did some amazing practical effects work of a foot wound that you could actually reach inside. So that's my tease. If anybody wants to see something gross, if you don't want to see something gross, maybe watch the movie and turn that part off.
You're really saying it. That's a good pitch.
As a director of photography, lighting a gross foot wound was something I never thought I'd have to do, and I'm lucky that I got to do it. Seeing behind the scenes, seeing how many people work on a set, you never think about this as a kid, like how many people are employed to do different things on a set and how many people it takes to do it, or possibly how few people it takes to do it. George Romero's crews weren't very big, and everybody was kind of pitching in, and so it's like becomes then, what am I able to do myself? What would I like to try to attempt to do myself? Yeah. And I did very little filmmaking in high school, or if you could even call it that. We didn't have any sort of film department. Our school didn't have like a big budget for like cameras or anything like that. I did do one project where it's so bizarre, but there's it's hard to even explain. I basically took the movie JFK, with that Oliver Stone movie where they do like the conspiracy of JFK's assassination, and tried to reimagine that into the assassination of Julius Caesar by Brutus.
Wow, that's an interesting connection.
I don't know how I passed that. To tell you the truth, I don't even know it was my class. It might have been my friend's class, and I was like, I'll do your project for you. But I had this weird idea, and I was like, I think this would be really funny, so we're going to film this. And my friends were just so cool back then, they were just on board. I grabbed people from the cross country team and stuff like that and dressed them in sheets and togas and filmed it in this kid's basement. And so it came to the part of the murder, and so it's like, well, how do we film like the stabbing scene? It was just all just like, I didn't write a script, I didn't plan it out. It was like, well, what can we do? What can we do with the people we have and that kind of thing. And I think after I did that though, and this little VHS tape started to get circulated around by like different teachers. The teachers were showing it to each other, like, look what these kids are making. Exactly. And I have a lot of teachers in my family. They were showing it to people and stuff. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it's just more than just me and my friends. Maybe other people would like to see weird stuff. Yeah. And so it kind of grew then. I did a short film that got into a couple festivals when I was around the film school time, when I was living in just had moved to Pittsburgh. Yeah. And that film was not very good, but you learn and you learn and you grow and you grow. And then I got more into commercial work and had to kind of put down the creative side and did more of the business side of it's still creative, but it's like it's your creativity mixed with a lot of other things that just have to be in there because they have to be in there. Exactly. A lot of like, well, here's the notes, and this line has to be inserted. It might not make sense, but it's in there now. And so I don't know how thrilled I would have to be to shoot another car commercial or like used car salesman commercial, anything like that. I don't know how you can. I have a lot of respect for people who do that. A lot of respect for people who do that kind of work. But like I am at the moment more interested in it's storytelling again. Yeah. And I think that what got me originally. I'm kind of going back to what got me into filmmaking, what got me into horror, and it's that telling the stories. And Wes Craven, who did Nightmare on Elm Street, was an excellent storyteller. I got to meet him while I was in film school, and he told us the story. He's told it many times. People can look it up. I'm not going to retell it because I couldn't do him justice. But there's stories behind everything. There's stories about how he came up with Freddy Krueger. There's stories about why is that scary? Why is the claw scary? Why is it scary to go to sleep and have nightmares? You get reasons for everything. There's always a reason.
I think that's why he still gets so much praise still today for the work he put into it, the work he did as well. So I completely agree with you. Yeah. So, but I was thinking of asking something I find very interesting, like watching horror movies. What would you say is stuff in horror movies that would scare you? I mean, we talked about practical effects and stuff when we watch a movie, if it is gory or if it's splatter and stuff like that. But just thinking, what can still make you feel scared when you watch a horror movie? What affects you?
That's an excellent question. And the more you watch, the harder it is to scare you. Yes. Yeah. And so like, and the more filmmaking knowledge you have, the more you start to think of, just looking at the way the screen direction is, if the camera starts to drift over, you're like, okay, well, they're trying to hide something that's going to come in from the other direction. That you can start to see where jump scares would happen. And so jump scares, it doesn't work on me as much anymore, because I'm thinking more in terms of practicality and sound design and the way that they craft it. But in terms of like what's actually scary, I mean, I think the most recent one that really got me was The Witch.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Eggers, Robert Eggers, I believe, is the director. It felt so authentic and so paranoid to the actual idea of in the U.S. It's a U.S. tale. Mm-hmm. The idea of witches. We're terrified of witches, and the U.S. is a very fearful country. Always has been, and so there's a lot of othering, things they don't understand. If you don't understand something, there must be some evil force behind it. Yeah. And there was a genuine panic. I've been to Salem where they had the witch trials, and you can go to Salem and you can actually put a witch on trial, which I found very fun. They do this little act out thing where you go to the square and these people in full costume, like I'm wearing basically what I'm wearing today, and everybody else is wearing, a 17th century like garb, and they're like, she's a witch, and I'm like, yes, burn her, and like I joined right in. I joined right into the mob. I didn't think I would, but I was caught up in it. and
got caught up in the
I
moment.
got caught up in the moment. I was like, I guess I would be maybe not so politically correct if I lived in that time. But they take them in and they lay out the evidence of everything she did, and did someone see her float on a broomstick? Did they not? And it really kind of lays it out, like the kind of ulterior motives people had, just people they didn't like, they would start calling witches, and so in The Witch, it's a young woman who her youngest sibling, she's babysitting that baby, and the baby disappears, and so is it her fault?
I see.
But that movie really made me feel like I was watching an authentic account of something very, very dark, and there's some tremendous acting and talent behind it. And I think that was the last one where I remember when the lights came up in the theater, no one just got up and like no one just like made a beeline for the door and stuff like that. Everybody just kind of sat there and thought for a second. And I saw a few people's hands like kind of go up over their mouths, like, what did I just witness? And I was like, this is amazing that I still can get that feeling. But yeah, The Witch was one. It Follows was a very good film. Crafting scares though, and so the Witch was the entire mood of the movie was what bothered me and like made me want to keep the lights on and stuff like that. It was just the mood of dread.
Because speaking of witches, I remember at the time when it came, I remember watching the Blair Witch Project, and I've realized that. Watching a lot of horror movies, like you said, like jump scare effects and stuff, those kind of stuff, don't affect me as much anymore, if even they affect me. But what I can find very terrifying, which the Blair Witch Project was an example of, was the idea of you're not seeing what's going on, so your mind starts to create the images or create what's going on there at the time.
Such a great point. And not to interrupt, but like as I'm thinking, like as we're having this conversation, I'm not even lying. The hairs on the back of my neck start to go up. It's that feeling, and I can replay in my mind like the very first time. Like I don't want to give anything away in The Witch, but you see very little. Yeah, you see very little, and it's the sound design. And the first time you hear the actual witch laugh, it does something to me, like it just scares me so bad to think that like, oh, this whole time you're like, does it exist? And you hear the witch laugh and you're like, oh, it's real. And it's just this holy crap moment of sheer terror that like your worst fear, is being realized. Like, oh, this is real. No, it's not make believe, and so you kind of have to trick yourself. It's a little bit of a mental thing. You have to be in the mood to be scared or be open-minded to be scared.
Exactly. I remember watching the remake of It in the cinema, and I enjoyed the remake, but I still found that the Tim Curry version was still my favorite, and even though it was made for television, I mean, how they stretched all the boundaries so they could make it work on television. It was like a miniseries then. But one scene in particular I'm thinking about is the opening scene with the boys playing and the little brother gets in the claws of Pennywise. Yeah. Because I remember so vividly when I watched the first one with Tim Curry that when the famous line gets, he says, "You'll float too." Yeah. You just see him with the teeth, and then it fades to black. You see, I'm already getting goosebumps
when you
just
think
thinking
about it. Yeah,
and that's so scary.
It's so scary.
But in the remake, they made it roughly the same. But when that scene happens and he says, "You'll float too," then suddenly he has this enormous jaw and bites off the arm.
And it becomes the CG thing, over-reliance on the fantasy aspect and less in your mind.
Exactly. And then you see the boy in agony, he's shouting, and then he slowly gets pulled down the drain. And it doesn't work for me.
It's hard.
It's hard. It's so hard.
But I think that question that Brendan brings up is like, is it more because of our generation then? Because like we have an eye for like the way that we grew up and what was scary to us, the way it was filmed, the practical effects and stuff like that. The newer generation who are seeing it for the first time and haven't lived through the miniseries, is that the new kind of like visual realism for them?
I would absolutely say so. I think we have a different reference from the movies, like you said, like we grew up with, and how a horror movie should be, or maybe we think of it how it's going to be, and what we are about to watch. So I would say that without them having the same reference as we do, then this is the norm. This is the way a horror movie is supposed to be, and then of course they can appreciate it even more. And but it's interesting perspective. I mean, how things have evolved, how things have progressed, and what it is today. But because, like I said, I can't remember at the moment. I just remember the last Halloween trilogy that they made that I found very good, except the last one. It was
the David Gordon Green.
Except
Halloween
because the first one, when it came out, I mean, I was so psyched when I remember going with two friends of mine, and one of them, I apologize if she's watching. She's very scared of scary movies, but she agreed to it as a good friend as she is. And her boyfriend that was also with us in the movie at the movie theater, and I remember like she was sitting with a blanket like this, being very scared, and her boyfriend holding her hand. He was like, "Okay," and me going like this. Oh my God, this is so good! And I was like,
yeah.
So that's also maybe a part of nostalgia as well. There's a new Halloween movie, and you're bringing a new touch to it and making it feel more close to the first film that you watched as well. I think that it played a lot on the nostalgia, but at the same time trying to keep it in the same visual style as the first with the John Carpenter version.
There was a lot of callbacks, and it was trying to keep that to make Michael Myers scary again. Kind of that's the way I kind of felt about it. It was kind of like, not the like "Make America Great Again" thing, but it was kind of like trying to do this thing like, do you remember when he was actually scary? Before Busta Rhymes did a drop kick to him or whatever.
Oh Jesus! Was it the one with they had like a reality show? It's like they're in a old building or something that they're gonna shoot with cameras, and then Michael Myers.
That is one of my worst movie going experiences. Maybe the worst movie going experience that I ever had. I was in college when that movie came out, and I actually skipped a class to go to it, psyching myself up, being like, "I'm going to see Halloween. I don't have to go to." It wasn't film school. I wouldn't have skipped a class of film school. It was engineering when I got my bachelor's.
Okay, then it's okay.
Skipping like machine design or statics or something, and I was the only person in the theater because it was a matinee. And so I was like, even scarier. Is Michael Myers behind me? I don't know. Like I was like freaking myself out. This is before like social media and selfies. But if I would have had like, social media at the time, I'd have been like, hashtag I'm too scared. But like,
sorry.
The music comes up and everything. And like, it was awful. It was awful, an awful film. I'm sorry to everyone involved who had to work on it. Like it was so bad, and they even misspelled one of the actresses' names like in the opening credits. And
that was new to mind. I did not know that.
But like not good. And I was like, wow, so this is like what they're gonna do with the franchise. Like, I at the moment I had no hope. I was like, if this is what the fate of poor Michael Myers, like, all of our childhood, heroes or not heroes. Our childhood killers are going to be drugged through the mud.
But speaking of that, do you feel that there's been like franchises today, like horror franchises that have been like not watered out, but I would say worn out, or that they've had their time, or if they haven't had the fortune of reinventing themselves or continuing?
I mean, I understand why they have to keep making them to retain the rights and that kind of thing, and I understand that. I've been impressed with a couple of the remakes, or reboots or reimaginings. The Hellraiser reimagining was great. Wasn't as good as the original, but they did their own thing with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, is maybe just doing your own thing is maybe the key, and then it doesn't have to all be canon. People can choose what they like and don't like about it. I think when you try to make everything fit is the problem, because there's just been too much time. I think Freddy, we've learned that only Robert Englund can really play Freddy. There may have been a window where they could have done more with it. I've read some good scripts. Guillermo del Toro wrote a script for A Nightmare on Elm Street, part something, and they never used it. And now look at him. Everyone's probably kicking themselves. That was probably the chance to make him more mainstream and revitalize it. I think that right now I watch Chucky, which is a TV show now, but it used to be the film series. And they've done so much work to everything's canon. There's no period of something that happened in Chucky where they have to like retcon it and be like, well, we're not going to talk about that again.
So everything from first Child's Play and onward.
And it just keeps getting more and more over the top. And that's what you can do with Chucky, though, because Chucky's a killer doll.
Yeah.
And that's
which
a
is
little bit
scary in itself.
It's scary in itself, but it's already so outlandish. It's not the shark in the water, because you've seen sharks in real life. You've never seen a live living doll that has somebody's soul put into it. Hopefully not. But Chucky was not necessarily. It was always tongue in cheek. It was a campy idea. Yeah. And they took that kind of camp and they just ran with it. So now he's, in the White House and all kinds. Okay. And I love that they leaned into the bizarre side of it, and they kept the original team involved and everything. So I think you can. But I like to take a long break from Michael Myers, unfortunately.
After this now it feels
let some time. Let some time pass. And I don't think that they did necessarily a bad job with the last trilogy. I just, I
still think that the first one in the trilogy was a really good comeback for the character and or characters, I would say. But then at the same time, retconning all of the other ideas that they had after the first one. So they basically took aside all of the sequels and then said like this is direct sequel to the absolute first movie as well. So
and I have a little bit of a problem with like the idea that like everybody has to be pleased. You get like these petitions online to like change things before they even come out. They see the trailer, and there was something that happened with Sonic the Hedgehog or something, but like it's happening in horror also where things get leaked and then people get this idea of how it's going to be. And then it's like, well, don't do that. We're going to be so outraged. And so the filmmakers panic and they go and reshoot. Yeah. And there's like all this thing with test audiences and stuff. I was part of one test audience for Scream 4. And so the ending I got was not the ending that ended up in it. And it wasn't the ending.
That's interesting.
It wasn't. So I understand why they do that. And they may have like other ideas or competing ideas when there's a lot of people involved. But to me, it takes the magic out of it. Yeah. Like I want to see their vision. I don't want to see what tested the best.
No, exactly.
Even if it's not necessarily what I would agree with.
No.
So I'm sorry. Movies aren't meant to be perfect. They can be, but it's, extremely rare. It's not a perfect medium.
Absolutely. I agree with you, bro. But looking in at today or like upcoming future movies, is there a movie that that's in production now that will soon have its premiere that you're looking forward to within the horror genre?
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ty West, the filmmaker. He has a trilogy in which he is directing his wife, Mia Goth, and I believe they're married. I hope I didn't just say they were married, but I think they're.
We can change it. We can.
They seem to have a good working relationship, and I do think they're. But so he did X, which was kind of like a movie about like a slasher set in the porn industry, and then he did a prequel called Pearl, and then his final film in the trilogy, and this was, I believe, a planned trilogy, kind of a character study, is called Maxine, and that is coming in a couple months, and they used the Bates Motel set from Psycho.
Yeah, it's still available.
Yeah, still available to use in the Universal lot. And I knowing that it's there, you don't want to have everything set in the Bates Motel, but knowing that a piece
infringement.
Right. If anything's going to be haunted, or if anything's going to have like this kind of like reverence behind it, I really enjoyed the way they recreated a lot of Kubrick sets from the original plans for Dr. Sleep.
Yeah.
Just that kind of love of movie making really is attracted to me. Like, people who are fans of the genre really putting the maximum amount of effort in. But great cast, I'm sure, involved in this one. I enjoyed the previous two, and having this kind of, a very similar style of acting to like Jamie Lee Curtis in these Final Girls. Really, David Lynch would always say, like, a woman in trouble. You can't go wrong with, he did his like little high-pitched voice. You can't go wrong with a woman in trouble. And that's my David Lynch impression.
It was almost like he was here.
Exactly. So it's true. I mean, there's tropes that just work if you do them right. Yeah. And so because he's such a talented filmmaker, I'm excited for that one. How about you? Anything coming?
Yes. People might disagree with me on this, but one film I'm actually looking forward to since I saw the first teaser trailer now is the new Alien movie.
Ooh, Romulus, right?
Yes. And also what we talked about earlier, it's pure practical effects. The director is Fede Alvarez, who did Don't Breathe.
And The Evil Dead.
Exactly.
One of the Evil Dead movies.
I think so. Yeah. He's already said that there's almost no CGI in the movie, and his track record, shows that he knows the genre quite well. So I'm very interested in watching his take on it. And when I saw the teaser trailer, I go, okay, I want to watch this movie. And he's brought in the crew from James Cameron's Aliens to do all the effects.
Amazing.
As well. So, and also just the opening shot in the teaser trailer when you see the ship, it's also practical. It's no CGI. Yeah. And immediately when I saw it the first one, oh, this looks good. Yeah. And then I mean, the Alien movies lately have been having mixed receptions. Although I really enjoyed the one that Ridley Scott did, Prometheus. Mm-hmm. I found it so beautiful and so cool, but a bit uneven. And then the sequel to that one was a bit of I did not understand what happened there. No. So I was expecting a closure ending to if it was like a trilogy, but seeing this now, where they're going at, and also there's a TV production going on as well. But seeing the teaser trailer for Alien Romulus had me. I'm sold. I'm completely into it. So I maybe even watch it in the cinema. That could be actually quite fun.
I think that would be a lot of fun. And I think that it's a monster movie, right? Like when it comes down to it. And what a great creepy design. Like there's nothing more horrifying than that type of looking alien, not the big eyes, exactly. Not the E.T., that's just something that's, unlike anything on Earth, I think is the way you have to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So, so hopefully we can look into some nice horror movies in the future and see what scares us and what doesn't.
I agree. And hopefully we don't have to wait too long before our next scare.
Yeah, hopefully. John, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and maybe you will be invited back, and hopefully you can return soon again.
I sure hope so. Yes, I would love to come back. Thank you for having me. I had a wonderful time, and I love everything about talking about movies, and I love the fact that it's you talking about the movies. No. This is the perfect time for a good podcast, I think.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and you will definitely get an invite back.
Awesome.
So, awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast, please remember to click like and subscribe. It helps me with the channel, and it also helps me create more content. Thank you.